Sorry, I hadn't started the video. Welcome to our catechetical class, everybody. It's nice to be together. We are coming towards the end, honestly, of this cycle. I mean, only 2 or 3 more lessons after this, and that's good because we're starting up again in September with a new instructor. So that makes me very happy. But we are going through the life in Christ. So the last few classes we've talked about baptism, chrismation, the concrete things that'll actually make up your life as an Orthodox Christian. We talked about Holy Communion recently and prayer in general and what the significance of it. And we said, the Orthodox life is really defined by the sacraments, right? They're not the only thing you do, but every time, when a child is born, what's one of the first things you do? Well, you have him baptized. What happens when you get married? I mean, that's one of the biggest milestones in anyone's life. Well, you get married in the church, and when you die, of course, you get buried in the church. And then besides that, there are just throughout the week, every Sunday, you should be gathering at the church and reconnecting with God and with your people. And then on the big holidays, Christmas, Easter, Dormition of the Mother of God, and so on and so forth. And so your life will, as an Orthodox Christian, will be punctuated by these special ceremonies and services. So we talked about all those other sacraments, and we said a sacrament is an invisible, a visible sign of invisible grace, right? So if I hand you Holy Communion on a spoon, that is something you can see. It is visible. However, what it is visibly is not the same as what it is invisibly. Visibly, it's bread and wine. Invisibly, it's the body and blood of Jesus. I dunk you in the baptismal water. Visibly, it's water. Invisibly, you are entering into the tomb with Christ. So these are vehicles. The sacraments are vehicles by which God acts, through which God acts. The sacrament we're going to be talking about today is marriage, in our aptly titled chapter, The Mystery of Love. This is obviously a very important sacrament, and it is a sacrament. It is a sacrament. That is to say, we believe it's something that God does, like Holy Communion. It's not a mere agreement between people, but we'll go into that in a little bit. So here's our little blurb. This is holy matrimony is a mystery of the church in which man and wife work out their salvation in love and submission, serving as a living icon of Christ's relationship with the church. So there's something sacramental about marriage. One part of the reason it's sacramental is that marriage, when practiced rightly, is about salvation. And I think this is really important because for many eons of human history, marriage was more practical than anything else, right? And it still is, by the way. I was sharing with one of my groups of college students that there's significant evidence that people who get married, they accumulate wealth a lot more. It's a great way to establish yourself, and because you have division of labor. You two work together instead of just each of you doing it on your own. You split up the tasks you have to do, and that's just a good system to have. So marriage is very practical economically, but as time goes, I think it's important that our view is that marriage is practical economically, but that's not the primary purpose of marriage. And I think that's important as we move into the modern day, because there's less and less reason to get married for economic reasons, right? It's still more comfortable to get married. But now it's not life or death. For people in previous times, it was actually life or death. How are you going to get by without a spouse or something when resources are so scarce? So we still understand marriage is purposeful and relevant even when we have this great age of abundance, because it's not primarily about just our economic standing or about forging ties with other people, but it's about working out our salvation. The husband works for the good of the wife works for the good of the husband so that they can come to know the Lord. Yes?
I always thought the primary thing was making more family members.
So it's a really interesting idea. The fathers of the church would actually disagree.
Really?
They would say that that's the secondary purpose.
Oh, okay.
They said, I think it was St. John Chrysostom said that was the most important thing about it before the earth was well populated. But now that human beings dominate the whole earth, it's less critical that human beings reproduce so much.
The real thrust of opposition to homosexuality and lesbianism was it can't produce offspring.
The more technical reason for it is that if we're gosh, we're getting into this so early in the discussion.
I know.
It's that those organs don't go together, right? There's a
Right.
pretty obvious way human body is supposed to work, and that's not it.
Right.
That so yes, reproduction is the central part of that, but it's not the only part of that. Yes.
So like how children are are kind of secondary. Could this also relate to like through the love that the father and son have towards each other? That's how the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into that. That's a very, very astute point. But one more thing I wanted to say is that marriage in the Orthodox Church is understood to be a sacrament. What does that mean? It means, and I say this by way of contrast, again, not because I'm trying to pick on other, worldviews or whatever, but if you went down to the courthouse, or if you got married in a Jewish ceremony, or if you got married in an Islamic ceremony, the central part of marriage, or one of the most defining parts, would be the signing of a contract. So in the courthouse, that's self-explanatory. But actually, people know less that in Judaism, actually, the marriage revolves around a document called the ketubah, and in Islam, I believe it's called the nikah, because it's an agreement between people. Christianity never had that sense. Nowadays, of course, for the state of Virginia, we do sign documents, right? Because it is a legally binding agreement. But that's not the primary thing. Historically, in Christianity, marriage was not primarily a legal agreement, but it was something that God does to you. You walk in as two people. You go around the altar. You do. That might not make sense to you if you haven't seen an Orthodox wedding, but part of it is you walk around a holy table, and then And then afterwards, you are different than you were before. During that time, God came down and acted on you and connected you in a deeper way. So that's why we say it's sacramental, because it's not merely an agreement. It can have an element of an agreement, but the most important thing is that God affected you in some way while you were in the church saying those prayers. Something changed, and the husband and wife no longer bear the same relationship with each other that they did at the beginning. Yes. So. Okay, that's all by way of introduction, but explaining why. Now, marriage is a curious thing in that it's the only sacrament that we kind of recognize outside of the Orthodox Church, right? What do I mean by that? Marriage existed before the church was founded on earth. Okay, yes, the church always exists in heaven, but Adam and Eve were married. The patriarchs were married. We look at people in China. Who have nothing to do, those who have nothing to do with Christianity, and we can say they get together, they have a tear ceremony. We can look at that and say, even though it was not in a church, even though there were no prayers necessarily, we can still look at that and say, oh yeah, that was a marriage. Why? Because marriage is something kind of that's built into our nature. I was reading about it. Anthropologically, it's called the human universal. Virtually every society ever, has had some sense of one man plus one woman for life equals marriage. Now, of course, there are variations of it. Some have one man and multiple women. A smaller amount have one woman and multiple men. But they all had this kind of sense of a man and a woman coming together permanently. And interestingly, there was no, in no pre-modern society anywhere did you ever really have. They might have tolerated homosexual acts, but there was never the sense that two men, no matter how attracted they were to each other, could be a marriage. They would never call it that. They would never move into the same household together. Anyway, but marriage is a human universal. It's kind of built into us. Even if you live totally far from any kind of civil society, it's something that just kind of comes naturally to us.
Isn't that where, I don't know about, you're talking about many women and, what was it, 100, does that really matter?
One man, one woman for life. That's the Christian ideal.
Yeah, that's the Christian idea. The more primitive thing is one man with as many women as possible, because he can make many babies at the same time, whereas a woman has to wait 9 months.
So there's some really interesting, and this is like a total rabbit hole. There's a really interesting anthropological argument to be made that actually the more primitive societies have more monogamous attitudes, and it's actually the more advanced pagan societies that become polygamous. This is a whole rabbit hole, but it's based on the work of a Catholic priest and anthropologist named Schmidt or something, I think, from the turn of last century. Anyway, it's a fascinating discussion. So he actually has made the argument that no, actually the more primitive thing is monogamy, and polygamy actually came later, which would obviously line up with biblically how we view things.
Right.
It could be that that's not the case, but It's very interesting. So anyway, so now we can start the lesson. Okay. The Lord's first public miracle was at a wedding. Actually, the wedding service in the Orthodox Church references this a lot. It keeps coming back to the fact that Jesus performed his first public miracle at a wedding, at the wedding at Cana. The church always ascribed massive significance to this, and has always considered from it the fact that marriage is sacred. Now, of course, that goes before the New Testament, right? Even again, the first thing that happens in the Bible, the creation. One of the first things that happens in the Bible, the creation of Adam and Eve, is a marriage. That's always been seen as a marriage. Even though there was no white dress and veil and everything, the creation of Adam and Eve and their joining together was always considered a marriage. And then the last actually act of the Bible is a marriage. It's the wedding of the Lamb, Jesus Christ and his bride coming together. The end of the book of Revelation is a wedding. So biblically, marriage is always, and then the first thing Jesus does in terms of public ministry is he transforms water into wine at the wedding at Cana. And so again, miracles in the Bible, especially in the Gospel of John, actually, where the wedding at Cana is recorded, miracles in the Bible are referred to as signs, because it's not just that there's like, oh wow, look at this cool thing Jesus did, but it's like, no, this means something. If he did this publicly, it's because he wanted to communicate something about who he is and what he desires. So the fact that he did his first public miracle at a wedding means that he approves of marriage, he blesses marriage, he sees marriage as a good thing. Otherwise, if that were not the case, he would not have done that. So in order to understand the deep marriage, we need to understand the nature of sexual desire from which marriage springs, right? No one would get married if men and women didn't feel this powerful draw to each other, right? It's speaking as a camp counselor, not as a camp counselor, but I'm the assistant director for our youth camp. We understand that the forces that bring men and women together are very, very powerful because we're always fighting against them in a certain sense. We're just drawn to each other very, very naturally. It can start before puberty, but especially after we become sexually mature, we just feel it, and then even the force of it goes down a bit as we get older. But even then, I've had people in their 70s, say, hey, if you know any single men or something, let me in your church. So it's a very
in a nursing home, and I can say that
there's still
attraction.
That's
It doesn't go away.
Wow. Okay. Good to know. Good to know. That's great. Well, it's something very, very deeply written into our nature. But this is the basis of what builds marriage, right? People wouldn't get married if they were just like women or men. No one would come together. But it's because we feel this desire. Yes.
How does monasticism fulfill marriage? Because obviously, you don't have that fulfillment in that way. But
That's a great question. What the fathers of the church say, marriage is the highest achievement of human nature. Monasticism transcends nature. Monasticism takes you beyond the human because, and obviously, any of us living in the world and experiencing ordinary sexual desire, we know that you have to transcend nature to get away from that.
Yeah.
So both for men and women. The fathers see marriage as the highest natural good and monasticism as a supernatural good.
Can priests marry? Once you're a priest?
Yes, I'm married. I have a wife and 3
I don't know
kids.
if you
Yeah.
were maybe before.
Oh, sorry. Yes, a priest has to be married before he becomes a priest. And then, if may God have mercy on us if something happens to my wife, it's the end of the line, or else I would have to forsake the priesthood. Because you can see how that would be an ugly situation, right? If a priest were actively looking and it's also hearing confessions and it's like, hey, it's crazy that you're struggling with fornication. Hey, here's my number. What? That would be horrific, right?
I know clergy. Of course, they're not Orthodox,
Mhm.
but I know clergy that lost a spouse one way or another who remarried, and I don't know. I don't have any access to their private lives to
Yeah.
say any more than that. But it's at least on the externals, it doesn't seem to be any different than where the same priest has been married to the same.
I that is a whole can of worms that I don't really want to get into. Is
Right.
clergy remarriage? it had been proposed in the past specifically and only for widowed clergy for that reason. But I'm extreme. When I went through the process that um, I would that would lead to me becoming a priest, I went with the understanding that like this is it. That there's no second chance. So like I you know what I mean? Like I kind of, and I know it's a terrible burden to bear. I have some brother priests who are widowed, and that's really, really horrible. But that's what that's what the deal was. Like
Yeah,
so.
you signed on, and
Yeah.
your signature's on the paper, that's what it is.
So I don't know. I with full sympathy for the men to whom that happens, with complete love and not judgment towards them, I'm still very uncomfortable with the idea of a priest dating. It just seems weird because a priest, you call a priest father. A priest has a fatherly relation to the people around him. How can a father also be, looking for a date? I don't know. I don't know.
That happens all the time.
Yeah, well, again, we don't want it to be It happens all the time, and it's impermissible.
Yeah.
We don't want it to make it then permissible.
Well, no, I mean, okay, so, I'm a lawyer, I know this lawyer, and, his first wife left him, and, he didn't want the divorce or anything like that. She insisted on it, so there was nothing he could do about it.
Yeah.
And then, he, went out with, different ladies, he wasn't a priest, he was a lawyer, and, he remarried later.
Well, yeah, of course. But he was a lawyer, not a priest. Like
Right,
that,
exactly.
therein lies the difference. Anyway, okay.
He
Well,
was a father, he had children.
yeah, but he wasn't asking. Anyway,
Okay.
in order to understand the deep nature of marriage, we need to understand the nature of sexual desire from which marriage springs. That is the force that creates marriage. The Trinity is and by the way, when we say sexual desire, we're not just talking about the act of the physical act of coitus. We mean more generally. Yes, okay, that's something that powers that is central to it. But we're also talking about men just like women. They're pleasant. They smell good. This is all part of the bigger. Women just like men. This is all part of the broader heading of sexual desire. It's desire of the sexes for one another. It's not only erotic desire. It's something more broad. So the Trinity is the creator of all, and this is where Morgan, what you were saying is exactly right. The Trinity is the creator of all, and humans bear the image of the Trinity. Sexual desire, in its purest form, must reflect something of the Trinity. Does that make sense? If we are the image of the Trinity, then everything we do, at least when we do it properly, must emanate from the Trinity somehow. Right? Otherwise, we're not in the image of Trinity. We're in something else. Now, of course, we can do things that are not really in the image of Trinity because the image of God in us is warped by our sin. But on the basic level, when we are being properly human, in the fullest sense of the word, everything we do reflects God. Sex and sexual desire is a physical manifestation of eros, the yearning implanted in humans by the Creator. So this is really interesting, actually, because all over Orthodox spiritual literature, you'll have you ever heard the concept of the four loves? There are different kinds of love in Greek. There's agape, philia. So in Greek there are four different words for love. There's agape, which is like the highest, most self-sacrificial love, and it's love purely for the sake of the other. And that's the verb used when it says, "And for God so loved the world, He gave His only begotten Son." It was agape love. There's philia, which means friendship, right? You have love for your friends, and it's love in a real sense, but it's not the same as the totally selfless love. There is something else that I forget, and then there's eros.
Eros, and then there's another.
Yeah.
One,
Then there's eros, which is where we get the word erotic. That's desire. On the most base level, right? It's physical, sensual desire. But the fathers of the church actually use the term eros to describe the soul's longing for God many, many times. We the same way a man wants to embrace a woman, so our souls want to embrace and be embraced by God. Not in the sense that we get sexual pleasure out of it, because that would be very weird, but in the sense that we desire to to embrace, to fill and be filled by the presence, to become one with. Exactly, because that's what the sexual act is. It's becoming one, and we want to become with God in an analogous way. Yes.
The delineation is hard sometimes to work through. In the Gospel of John, at the end, Jesus confronts Peter, and he asks Peter, "Do you love me?" And he uses agape, and Peter answers philia.
Yeah.
And that goes until finally Peter asks it the third. Or
Jesus asks the
Christ
third
asks
time,
it
yeah.
the third time, and Peter answers back, "You know that I feel you."
Yeah.
And Jesus accepts that.
Yeah.
Does that mean something, or is that not? Some people say it means a lot. Some people say it doesn't mean anything.
I've heard both interpretations,
Yeah.
but suffice it to say, yes, all the different verbs for love are present in the Bible, and oftentimes because they mean different things. So it's, every language has its strengths and weaknesses, right? And so it's not like we don't bash the English language. The English language is beautiful in its own way, but I think the New Testament was revealed in Greek because it had these characteristics, like these multiple words for love, so that it could communicate more subtly different things about God. Because in English we just have one word, love, for 4 different concepts. Just like in English, I've harped on this before, but we use one word, hell, to describe 2 different realities, which in the Bible are Hades and Gehenna. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. So sexual desire is a physical manifestation of eros, the yearning implanted in humans by the Creator. Here's Archimandrite George writing, "But what, more than anything else, manifests the imprint of God on the human soul is the power of desire, eros, within the soul, and the impetus which a sanctified eros lends the soul in its movement towards its divine archetype. The saints, especially Maximus the Confessor and Dionysius the Areopagite, understand this power of eroticism as not referring simply to human sexual desire. To put it better, the sexual urge is an expression of what is of that natural yearning which is implanted within us by our Creator and leads us towards Him." So the yearning of a man for a woman and a woman for a man is an analogy for the desire of the persons of the Holy Trinity for one another. Again, I'll repeat it one last time, but not we don't say that the persons of the Trinity desire that each other in like a fleshy way, but they do desire each other with this powerful love. The Father desires the Son desires the Spirit, and the Spirit desires the Father. And all of creation desires God. All of creation has a natural longing for and desire for God. And so sexual desire is a manifestation of that same yearning in a more specific way, in a more physical, fleshy way, but it is the same like force that's out there that's powering human sexual desire. Sexual desire in its pure form is a longing for the other. The thing about sex is that sexual desire is it has to be for someone that's not me. No one can have a desire for themselves unless they're really, really disordered, right? It's about going outside of myself to someone else. It perhaps analogous to the selfless love of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit for one another. And this shows also why things like we're gonna have to talk about these topics today. So things like masturbation is not a proper direction of sexual desire because it's totally isolated. Or pornography, this consumption of pornography. You're not truly loving the person when you're watching whatever's happening on a screen. You know what I mean? You're desiring them, but you're desiring without love means it's distorted. It means it's twisted. So that's one of the reasons we can say on a theological level that these or prostitution the same way. It's not love; it's a transaction, right? These things are distortions of what should naturally be fundamentally about love, if it comes from God. So does that make sense so far? Okay.
Is bestiality in that the same thing, or is it something different? Because
Yes.
it's a different species altogether.
That would be certainly a distortion of nature.
Oh,
because
yeah.
If we can say that yes, any sexual act where it's clear that the body is not meant to be used that way is a distortion.
It's like, was it? I think it's mules mules are a joint between.
Oh yeah, yeah,
and,
yeah,
and they can't produce
yeah.
offspring because
Mules are a cross between a donkey and a horse, and they themselves are sterile. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
actually
yeah.
crazy. One of the church fathers actually wrote specifically about mules and said that they were like abomination or something. I can't remember which one it was, but for that reason. But yeah. Okay. So evil has no essence. It is a distortion of the good. Sexual desire has become evil because it has become fundamentally self-oriented, rooted in self-gratification. Instead of desiring others for their own sake, as in the Trinity, the Father desires the Son for the sake of the Son. The Son desires the Spirit for the sake of the Spirit. We desire others for how they make us feel. You know, pornography is the apotheosis of this, right? I am literally consuming you as an object. But honestly, it's a similar principle behind, you know, forgive me, but something like rape. That's an act where it's fundamentally about me and without any regard for, you know, what effect it has on you. That's a total distortion of what is otherwise fundamentally good. Yes.
Sorry to keep
Yeah.
interrupting, but so could you fundamentally boil down like sin and virtue to like action in service of yourself rather than action in service of the other, or love of yourself or
Yeah.
versus love of the other?
Yeah. Yes, you absolutely could. And that's a really good insight. You can fundamentally be oriented towards God, which would then embrace all other people. You know, the Bible's very clear that if you are oriented towards God, then if you are loving God or serving God, you have to serve other people in the process, or it's not genuine service of God. Or you can serve yourself, which is also service to the devil, the fathers say, and the Bible says. But you really have those two choices in life. And it's really good that you brought that up, because we kind of, especially in our modern American context, when we're very comfortable and we like to live comfortably, we think there's a third option. We think you can serve God, or you can serve the devil, or you can just be neutral. It's not really an option given to us. We can serve God or serve ourselves, but that's not to say we can't have any care or regard for ourselves at all. But I think you understand what I'm saying. Yes.
Is that the real sin in the story of, what was it, the Levites and who was it, the two, was it a priest that was walking from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and they saw the man laying.
You talking about the Good Samaritan?
The Good
Yeah.
Samaritan, you know, that's not my problem. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the fact that the priest and Levite passed by and did not help the Good Samaritan was a failure to love. Absolutely, and it was they thought primarily about themselves. Why? The reason they probably passed by him was that they are religious officials. They're a priest and a Levite. They have to serve the temple, and to help this wounded and bloodied man would make them ritually impure. So they were putting their religious obligations ahead of, you know, brotherly love, and that's what Jesus is condemning. So yes, it was a failure to love and thinking only about themselves. So our participation in the Orthodox Church is about our healing and reordering our disordered drives or passions. So all of us have the quote unquote natural inclination to serve ourselves first. We totally. A certain amount of self-regard is built into us by nature, right? You have to eat or sleep. So if you had absolutely zero care for yourself, you wouldn't be able to function. You just die.
Right.
But our disorder lies in the fact that we desire way more than is necessary and way more selfishly than is necessary. You know, we all eat way too much. We all acquire way more goods than we need. We all desire to, use other people to gratify our own desires rather than for their own sake and for their own benefit. So these are all distortions of our self-love. And so to be Orthodox is to be in the process of healing, right? Doesn't mean everyone in the church is perfect. Doesn't mean barely anyone in the church is perfect. But it does mean, at least as long as you're here, you should be trying to be different. You should be trying to live differently and reorient. So, if you become Orthodox, that should include with it that for the rest of your life, you're going to try to own fewer unnecessary things. You're going to try to eat a little less than you used to. You're going to try to not use other people in all sorts of different ways. And there are two paths by which the church, and so part of that is our sexual desire. when I'm being an Orthodox Christian, I'm trying to heal a lot of things. I'm trying to heal my greed. I'm trying to heal my laziness. I'm trying to heal my anger. But one of the things I'm also trying to heal is my disordered sexual desire. The fact that I want to be an Orthodox Christian means that I'm trying to change that about myself, or rather, invoking God's help and trying to be different. And there are two paths by which the church heals sexual desire, primarily, which are marriage and celibacy. Marriage and celibacy. These are the two options. These are the only ways to be on the path to healing. Sort of free and easy, casual single life will not lead to your healing. Marriage has as its most basic aim to direct our sexual desires to one person for the rest of our lives. It's a healthy outlet for our sexuality. I told you again. There's the physical act of coitus, which of course is part of it. But it's just more. It's also more general than that. A man just wants attention and affection from a woman outside of the bedroom, and a woman wants certain things from a man outside of the bedroom, and that's all part of it. And this is by having a wife, I have a healthy way to get female attention and affection and all the pleasantness that goes with being around a woman. That instead of going chasing after groupies or whatever, there's another way you might satisfy that sort of desire. So it's a healthy outlet for our sexual desires. It's a way, there's an interesting thing. There's a lot of interesting stuff to be said about this. It does not come easily to us because our natures are so warped by sin, right? Everyone who's married has the experience of just because you get married doesn't mean you stop being capable of desiring people who aren't your spouse. Right, it's one of the biggest things Jesus warns against, because it comes very naturally to both men and women to still be capable of desiring other people. And why? Because our natures are so warped by sin. If we were properly healthy, if we were fully healed and redeemed in the image of God, then the moment we get married, we just lose all attraction to all other people besides our spouse. That's how, if things inside us were working properly, that's how it would be. Unfortunately, things are not working properly right now. So natural, natural is what is God's will. That is natural. It's interesting because a lot of people, they look and say, "Oh, it's natural for a man to desire more than one woman," or it's a natural for a woman to desire more than one man. When they say natural in that sense, they mean it comes easily. But it's not natural in the sense that's not how God intends for it to be. So it's unnatural in that way, because natural is ultimately. What is natural? What is unnatural? Why is someone calling right now? I'm sorry, I can't pick it up. What is natural is God's will. So in evolutionary description, and just because you're going to come across this like online, on YouTube, in articles or whatever, people say, men have this tendency towards promiscuity for evolutionary reasons. Well, that might there might be some strength to that, but ultimately they're speculative. No one actually went back in time and observed Neanderthal man and watched. How could you? They're just so a lot of these quote unquote evolutionary explanations are just people projecting their views of things backwards in time. They don't really know. So it's like, oh, science says this or that. Well, if you're talking about things that potentially happened millions of years ago, you can't really have all that much certainty. So don't put too much stock in that when people say, oh no, men are it's natural, they're promiscuous. It's normal. No, it's not. And be careful, who you trust for you. Yes. Were you raising your hand? Okay.
And part of that is just the natural state we fell into, natural, sinful.
Right.
And
Exactly.
fighting that urge.
Yeah,
Exactly.
What good is that? You're operating out of your primal instincts that God gave you the power to overcome when
Right.
He made you human.
Right. Right. It's exactly. It's the same as saying that, like, it's natural for me to eat 3 pizzas and a cake every day because I want to do it. Well, yeah, okay, your body is telling you to do it, but you're gonna die of a heart attack when you're 30. If you do that every day.
You have power over your body.
Exactly. God gave you the rational will so that you could overcome that. So, McDonald's every day is not natural, even though it comes easily. So anyway.
Your dog needs a leash. You don't.
Yeah. Hey, that's good. That's really good. But the second, so the primary, the first dimension of marriage is just to have a healthy outlet for sexual desire. And again, that does mean erotic in the narrow sense, but also more broadly. We just like each other. Men just like women, women just like men, and we need a healthy outlet for that liking. Otherwise, we all know the type, of a man who just seeks attention from every woman and woman who seeks attention from every man. That's unhealthy. That's not how we're meant to be. It's not to mean you can't like other people, you can't have friends or whatever, but you know what I'm saying. The second but very significant purpose is the subjugation of the ego. The primordial archetype is the relationship of Christ to the church. The primordial archetype of maleness and femaleness is the relationship of Christ to the church. And remember, all things we experience in this world are reflections of spiritual realities. Actually, well, there's a rabbit hole you could go down. There's a group of scientists, mainstream, who are also working on these same principles, represented by a guy named Michael Levin. If you read any of his lectures on YouTube, it's fascinating. But the idea of Platonic primordial archetypes being a really real thing in nature. And anyway, the primordial archetype is the relationship of Christ to the church. Maleness and femaleness are an image of the uncreated God in the created world. So ultimately, what we are acting out in a husband and wife coming together, we are acting out the relationship of Christ in the world coming together. That's going to be completed at the end of time. The creation longs for God. God longs to be reunited to his creation. That's why the end of time is describing the marriage of the Lamb, the wedding of Jesus Christ. So here we're going to read the wedding epistle, because this is or part of the wedding epistle. Yes, let me get the Orthodox Study Bible so I can just read the whole thing for you, because I only have part of the quotation here. But this,
Household codes.
yeah. This is what, every marriage conducted in the Orthodox Church has a reading from the Epistle and the Gospel, just as though it were in the Divine Liturgy.
Ephesians.
Yeah, Ephesians, yes, exactly. So Ephesians 5:22 to 33. This is really important, and unfortunately, because of the language used in it, it's I think misunderstood by many people. This is starting from verse 20. Is giving thanks always for the good thing, for all things to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another in the fear of the Lord. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as also Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh and of his bones. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. So, this is what's read at every wedding. And it was read at my wedding and Tom's wedding, and it'll be read at your wedding, God willing, if and when many of you are married in the church. And obviously, you can imagine how it rankles people a little bit with that language of wives submit to your husbands. And there's a lot of dimensions that we need to talk about there. I mean, first, there is a level on which the man is the head of the household. There is a certain executive function that the man has. That's not to say that the man dominates or rules, or that the orientation of the household is to be around his will or satisfying his whims. That's completely wrong. The stereotype of the 1950s husband that everyone serves, and brings him slippers. That's not right, or at least that's not what the church is talking about here. But I think there is. I've heard many women complain before that my husband will not be a man. That he will not take charge. That he will not show any kind of executive leadership. And I do think there's a way the natural orientation of men and women is that the women want their, not to, again, not their husband to rule over them or anything, God forbid, but at least that he shows some initiative, show some drive, show some ambition, and in that way take charge and take care of the family. Yes.
Is this like the same thing that like the ecumenical patriarch is? Like he has a primacy with love. He's expected.
Yeah, he's the first among equals. Yeah, so that's a great point. It's the whole way our church is run, right? We don't have one leader like the Pope. We have the first patriarch of the church, Patriarch Bartholomew. He is first among equals. So he has like this kind of primacy of honor, but that doesn't mean he's better than anyone else. So the husband has this specific role. Doesn't mean he's better than his wife or that he gets to lord over her. Yes.
And the papacy doesn't work in a vacuum either. The papacy has a college of cardinals, and you know it's he can go out of that if he feels he really has to. Yeah, he'll get into a lot of trouble if he does.
Sure.
But
Okay.
generally, the Pope knows what all the traditions are, and all the other guys are on the same page. So it's not as, you know, brutal as some might make it out to be, but it can be.
Okay. Okay. But at the same time, this is people who get rankled by the part of wives submit to their husbands. They often are kind of like ignoring the second part, which is husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself to her. How did Christ give himself to the church?
Sacrifice.
He died. He died on the cross. He bled out and was stabbed. It's not. The wife submits to the husband, but then this husband submits to the family. He gives of himself in a sacrificial way. If you hear just one part of this message, then you're hearing just what you want to hear. If you hear the totality, the key thing is the wife is giving herself up, and the husband is also giving himself up. You are no longer living for yourself. You are living for the other. And that's what marriage, that's the secondary but very important part of marriage. You live for another person, and especially when kids come along. You very much learn to not live only for yourself. That's when, again, it's a distortion of marriage when everything becomes all about the husband's whims. That is a failure to live out marriage because, why? Because the Trinity is not like that. Not everything is oriented around the Father, but the Father and Son and Spirit are in perfect harmony. The Father has primacy of honor, let's say, but he's equal to the Son and the Spirit. If it's just about fulfilling Dad's desires, that's a broken home. But also when mom or when the kids rule the household, that's also can be a very ugly situation. Everyone's supposed to sacrifice for each other, everyone is supposed to live for the sake of the others. So family life is supposed to humble us. It's supposed to teach us to go outside of ourselves, because that's the core of sexual desire, right? Is going outside of yourself. No one's attracted to themselves. Everyone's attracted to someone else. And that it's about when it's properly oriented, it's for the other. But also notice at the very beginning of the passage in verse 21, it actually says both spouses must submit to one another. So it says submitting to one another in the fear of God. In verse 21. So that's that. But also there's also one last dimension to this, and specifically about sexual relations. Now we are talking about the bodily act, and it's in 1 Corinthians 7:4-5. The wife hath not power over her of her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power over his body, but the wife. Defraud ye not one another, except it be with consent for a time, that ye may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinence. The King James English, I'm sorry, the husband, but the wife does not. Basically, the wife's body belongs to the husband, and the husband's body belongs to the wife. It's actually kind of crazy if you read this in the ancient context. St. Paul was writing, to Roman citizens or whatever. He says the wife does not have power over her body, but the husband does. Yeah, okay, we get that. But then he says the second part: the husband has no power over his own body, but the wife. That was crazy. For an ancient Roman context, that would have been like, wait, what? No,
Yeah.
I'm the boss here. But that's what that's why it's believed that Christianity partly became very popular among women because it certainly wasn't feminist in like the modern sense, but it was very elevating the situation of women versus what they were used to experiencing.
Law of pater familias.
Yes, exactly. Where the the head of a Roman household ruled his house like a little god. Everything oriented around him.
Everything, life, death,
Yeah,
you name it.
yeah. He could choose which of his children to sacrifice, which is a really terrible custom. Yes.
Wasn't it popular among women also because Romans used to leave their babies outside the city gates, and those would be girls that would be undesirable. Christians would take them in.
Yeah, so that was a thing, very common, very common. We think like abortion is a modern problem. No, people always had ways to get rid of unwanted children, and in the Greco-Roman world, leaving infants to exposure was very common. And one of the things that was very popular about Christianity back in the day is that Christians not only, and by the way, leaving your children to die of exposure, it was disproportionately would fall on the female infants. They would want to get rid of. Yeah, it's a ugly thing. It's an ugly thing. It's really horrifying. Like if you read about what the pre-Christian world was, it's not pretty. And so it was popular, and it was the father of the family who got to make the choice. Mom, I don't care how much you love your baby. If dad says it's got to go, it's got to go. It's horrifying. It's horrifying.
Starve and die and just.
It would starve and die, or a common thing was to be picked up by slavers. So people would be going through looking for slaves, and for a lot of the young women, it would be sexual slavery. It's horrible. The Christians, one of the things they did was they went through the wilderness looking for exposed infants to take them in and raise them and baptize them and teach them the faith. So that was another reason, it's believed Christianity became very popular among women because they liked the babies. And so we've always been like, you think like, oh, Christianity, pro-life, this or that. We've always been like a very, very pro-baby, pro-family religion. That's always kind of been our thing. Yes.
Cicero's got a letter. I didn't ever read the letter, but I read an excerpt of it in another book. That Cicero had written to his friend. And his friend was complaining that he was having a lot of problems with one of his children, needed a lot of help. And Cicero just simply said, well, just put the baby out in the woods and forget about it.
Yeah.
And it was just matter of fact, like, you need to change the tire? Well, go change the tire, throw the old tire away.
It's hard. This was behind. This is a really good point, and I appreciate you bringing it up. But if you've ever heard of, like, there's a historian, Tom Holland, who became a Christian recently and was like kind of famous. But it was because he was a historian and he was reading about all this stuff, and he was like, "Wow, I didn't realize how absolutely ugly the world was like before Christ came." And that's why we say Christ liberated us from the demons, because he did. I mean the devil still is ruling, and you think about how casually we talk about disposing of our infants. Yeah, now through abortion. Well, now it's more subtle, right? You don't have to listen to a baby cry, but it's the same fundamental act. Because children have always been an inconvenience. It's hard to raise a kid. It costs a lot of money, and it's the most exhausting thing you'll ever do. So I understand it. I understand the motivation behind it. There's always been a motivation to get rid of unwanted kids, but we as Christians have never been able to do that. We've never done that, and it's disgusting if we ever change that. Not that the Orthodox Church will ever change, but I just mean the broader culture. Okay, so through marriage, sexual relations are properly channeled. So through marriage, sexual relations are properly channeled, and ego is overcome. Again, when a marriage is healthy, when things are going. That doesn't mean when a marriage is perfect, because no marriage is perfect, and we all struggle. Even saints in their marriages can struggle. But when things are going right, then the husband and wife reflect the mystical reality of Christ in the church. Perfect self-sacrificial life of the husband, perfect giving of herself of the wife. This union is by its very nature life-giving. So it's life-giving in the physical sense that people come out of it, that and everyone who ever existed came into the world through the union of a man and a woman. Everyone. There's no one alive who that didn't happen with. It's weird to talk about, but you only got here because of a chain of people having sex with each other that stretches back in time. It's weird to think about, but that is a simple fact of reality. So this union is by its very nature life-giving. Hence, children are a non-negotiable part of marriage in the sense that obviously infertility is a reality that people struggle with, and it's unfortunate, and it's not a sin to be infertile, obviously. You didn't choose that. But deliberate childlessness cannot be blessed by the church. So I always ask people when they're coming, because I have to do like premarital counseling, And no one, to be fair, no one has ever told me they're going to be deliberately childless. But if people say, no, I just want to enjoy my time with my husband or wife, we choose not to have any kids, I say, I cannot marry you. Or I will say, if that ever happens, because you are distorting one of the basic points of marriage. Now, it's different. There are people, really, openness to life is the ideal, that you're always open to having kids. In practice, there are situations where, you can take a break if you've had like 5 kids or something, right? Like, that can be really taxing on the body, on the bank account, whatever. But deliberate childlessness is a sin, and you cannot get married in the church. So this is also one reason why extramarital sex is so problematic. Because when I say extramarital sex, I mean adultery, of course, but I'm also just talking about people who have sex before marriage. A lot more babies are born that way than I think you realize. Very many of them are disposed of through abortion, very quietly, but we have this image in our heads that people can, like on the show Friends or whatever, they can just get together and have sex sometimes and it's all good. No, babies are constantly coming out of that. There's no, and to live entirely for the fulfillment of adult desires without any regards for the potential children, that is wrong. That is a sin. That is a failure to think about the other, which is what we said sexual desire is fundamentally all about. You have to be prepared to raise kids in a stable, loving home, and that is why marriage must always be a prerequisite for sexuality. I am a child of a divorced family. It sucks. Anyone who's been through it knows that it sucks. Anyone who has been, even though my parents do not have this terrible, hateful animus towards each other, it wasn't a super ugly divorce. It's not right for the kids. And the same goes for, it's not me accusing or blaming my parents. Things happen, whatever. But it is reality. No child is ever okay with their parent divorcing. Likewise, no child is ever okay with being born of 2 parents who don't even live together, something like that. It's always the worst choice for the child. If sexual desire is about thinking of the other, you have to think not just about the spouse. You have to think about the kids or potential kids as well. Otherwise, it is selfish. Reproduction is not the purpose of marriage, but it's the natural consequence. You don't eat in order to go to the bathroom, but it's the natural consequence. Maybe I shouldn't be comparing children to that, but that's how nature works. You don't only have, there's some people out there who, there's one Orthodox commentator on the internet who is a bit of a nutty guy, but he said, only ever have sex if you are, capable of conceiving and planning to conceive at that moment. That's not right. That's not what the church teaches. You can have, you can sleep together with your spouse just for the sake of your desire for them. And that's healthy, that's natural, that's blessed by God. But deliberate desire to sterilize yourself, that's more problematic. Anyway. Okay, that is everything. Any comments before we get into our little packet? Okay. The fathers speak. You have seen the amount of obedience necessary. Now hear about the amount of love necessary. Do you want your wife to be obedient to you as the church is to Christ? Then be responsible for the same providential care of her as Christ is for the church. And even if it becomes necessary for you to give your life for her, yes, and even to endure and undergo suffering of any kind, do not refuse. In the same way, then, as he honored her by the putting at his feet of one who turned her back on him, as he accomplished this not with threats or violence or terror or anything else like that, but through his untiring love, so also you should behave toward your wife. Even if you see her belittling you or despising and mocking you, still you will be able to subject her to yourself through affection, kindness, and your great regard for her. There is no influence more powerful than the bond of love, especially for husband and wife. A servant can be taught submission through fear, but even he, if provoked too much, will soon seek his escape. But one's partner for life, the mother of one's children, the source of one's every joy, should never be fettered with fear and threats, but with love and patience. What kind of marriage can there be when the wife is afraid of her husband? What sort of satisfaction could a husband himself have if he lives with his wife as if she were a slave and not with a woman by her own free will? Suffer anything for her sake, but never to disgrace her, for Christ never did this with the church. I mean, if you think about the fact that he's, you wouldn't blink an eye hearing that in the 20th century, but he was writing in the 300s. This is why, this kind of attitude was why, Christianity was so attractive, especially for women, because, and I still think, because, my parents are divorced, but actually I grew up, they didn't get divorced until I was in college, and I actually had a very happy upbringing, and I will always say, a happy relationship between husband and wife is an image of the kingdom of God. Everyone's happy. They're happy. The children are happy. They radiate that happiness outwards. It really is an image of Christ in the church. It is one of the most beautiful and blessed things. Is a happy home. Anyway, but yes, okay. Special study: God and gender. Few issues are as explosive in our society as those involving gender and religion. By the way, this was written in the 90s, so, buckle up. The Orthodox, maybe it's been updated more recently, so maybe, but anyway. The Orthodox Christian addresses these issues within the framework of the Church's self-understanding as the bride of Christ. Whether the issue at hand is inclusive language, the role of women in the Church, or homosexual desire, the answer lies in the great mystery: Christ in the Church. The peoples of the ancient world frequently worshipped female deities, accepted priestesses, and thought nothing of homosexual behavior, although importantly, they never called it marriage and never set it up as a parallel institution to marriage. They just accepted the act. Israel, however, stood alone in rejecting all of these practices. The reason for this lies in God's revelation of himself as being radically distinct from his creation. We have said that the world was created ex nihilo. Between the being of God and the being of the world, there is an irreducible gulf. The world is not God, has never been God, and will never be God. The fact that God has united creation to himself in the incarnation in no way destroys the distinction between the created and the uncreated. In Christ, we participate in the uncreated grace of God by becoming by that grace what he is by nature. But yet we never cease being creatures. Our created nature is never transformed into the divine nature. This difference between God and the world is expressed iconically by the disexuality of human nature. The disexuality just meaning that they're two. D is Greek for two. He could have said the bisexuality of human nature, but you would have been confused because that definition is already taken. In the divine scriptures, God is always represented by the male and creation by the female. God is the bridegroom, and the world, or more precisely the church, which is the world recreated in Christ, is the bride. God, of course, is neither male nor female. He is beyond all such created concepts. Nevertheless, he has given us certain images and concepts whereby we have come to know him. Though these concepts can never fully describe or define the indescribable God, we are nonetheless bound by them. It is true that the scriptures occasionally use female imagery in regard to God. For example, Christ is said of Jerusalem, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and yet ye would not." This is, however, a simile. Christ called God Father and not Mother. Christ is the Son of God, not the daughter of God. The use of inclusive or even gender-neutral language about God is an egregious violation of the integrity of the scriptures in the liturgy. To call God Mother is nothing less than to introduce a different God. Inclusive language blurs the distinction between the Creator and creation, elevating the creation, that is the female, to the place of God, thereby returning us once again to the original sin. Like we said, all language in the scriptures is meaningful. It is intended to communicate something about God that means something. So when God calls himself he and refers to himself as a father, it's because there's something he wants you to gather from your own experience with a father, as long as it's a good father, that should be reflective of God. He wanted to communicate something about himself. To change the language is fundamentally to change the meaning. That is not something we have the right to do. So yes, God is in who he is beyond gender, but we don't want to warp the meaning of the scriptures because it makes us more comfortable. Yes.
Yeah, I think there are places where what you're saying is certainly valid. There are other places, like for example, if I use the word anthros, that's male.
Yeah.
If I use the word anthropos, I'm really talking about humanity as a whole. And a lot of Bibles, and especially the older ones, don't make that distinction. I mean, blessed is the man who walks in the way of the righteous. Well, that's from the Old Testament, so I'm not sure there. But if in the Septuagint, whatever it might say, anthropos, and they translate it man,
Yeah.
So there are places where that's deceptive because it means different things.
Yeah, and that's true. You know, so when we say Christ was incarnate of the Virgin Mary and became man, the word in Greek is actually anthropos, which is gender neutral. So you could more properly translate that by saying Christ was incarnate of the Virgin Mary and became human. Because Christ became, yes, he was a physical man, but he united himself to all of male and female nature in that act. There are other places where the so yes, it is important in certain contexts to preserve the gender neutral language, because there are places when the Bible is deliberately gender neutral. When Paul says in the beginning of his letters, he says brethren. Actually, in the Greek, it's gender neutral. He's saying brothers and sisters. So it's
Now,
yeah.
when you're reading in the Old Testament, God spoke to the children of Israel, and it says, Bnei Yisrael.
hmm
That's not children,
It's sons, isn't it?
sons.
Yeah.
And to some extent, you probably should not change that, even though, it certainly probably means
Right.
the women, but you're living in a culture where everything is defined by the man telling.
Right,
everyone
and so
else
that's
what
why
to do,
in the
you
Gospel
know.
of John, it says Jesus Christ gives the people who believe in him the power to become sons of God.
Yeah.
It's not sons and daughters of God, it is sons of
Right.
God. Why? Because in the ancient world, sons inherit. And so he wants to communicate that everyone, even his female followers, will inherit. So that's why you have to. Anyway, it's important to be faithful to the use of gendered language in the Bible, whether it's masculine, feminine, or gender neutral. From this, it should be evident why it is impossible for the church to have priestesses. The male, because he is a creature, can represent God only iconically. The female, however, is creation. The church is essentially female. If, therefore, the priest, who is the image of Christ, the bridegroom, is a female, then what happens to the male principle? Once again, the distinction between creator and creation is destroyed, and a new religion is born. Actually, it is an old religion that is reborn, the religion of pantheism, which Israel and the church rejected. There's also a more practical level is... because now we've had the experiment, right? I mean, the first mainstream churches in the United States and the United Kingdom ordained the first female priests in the 70s, and basically all of them, have plummeted in membership since that time. So again, it might be like in theory we want women to have priests, but then not many people, male or female, end up actually following them. There's something our soul responds to in a male spiritual leader because we're desiring God, who is our Father. It's not again a cut on women or anything, but it just means we have a longing for a father figure in our life.
When you're reading something from another context, another culture, another time, you owe it to that author to hear what that author is trying to say in his own time and place. You can reinterpret it in your time, but first, this is what he meant. This was his culture or her culture, whoever you're reading. For example, everybody here has probably read Huckleberry Finn. Do you remember the story of Afro-American Jim? That's not what the text says.
This catechism class is taking an interesting direction.
Well,
Okay.
no, I'm just saying.
yeah.
Be true to what it's saying, not to what
Right.
it means to you now.
Right. No, that's a very good point. We have to yeah. Do you want to?
Oh, I'll let you finish up.
Okay.
Then I'll ask.
The inherent bisexuality of human nature and its iconic relationship to Christ and the church also explains the church's attitude toward homosexual desire. Notice the context in which St. Paul addresses the issue. Who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever? For this cause God gave them up to vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust toward one another, men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet. For Paul, homosexual desire is not only a result of the fall, it is actually paradigmatic of the fall, much in the same way that marriage is paradigmatic of Christ's saving relationship to the church. It is clear, therefore, that the church cannot bless homosexual activity. Human sexuality can rightly be expressed only in holy matrimony and celibacy. Now, by the way, the key rub, the key difficulty of homosexuality is the way the way we think about it has changed. At first, especially when the Bible was written, homosexuality is something you do. It is about certain acts that you're not supposed to practice. In the last 50 or so years, our culture has taught us that homosexuality is something you are. And so then it's not about forbidding certain acts, but it's about condemning a certain class of people. The scientific evidence for this is actually rather sketchy. It seems probably true that some men are built with homosexual desire that is immutable, that they can't change ever. The scientific evidence for women is a lot less certain, to say the least. But the important thing is whether or not you can change it, your body is not meant to do that. You know, it's clear that your body is meant to work a certain way. So it doesn't mean you're a bad person, doesn't mean we hate you, and it doesn't mean you should be singled out for condemnation. God forbid. That is evil and that is wrong. And I think, you know, especially certain men who are, you know, homosexual, however the desire ends up being implanted in them, there's a connection between homosexuality and genius, actually. Like, so a lot of famous people, like Alan Turing, you know, one of the founders of computer science was gay. You know, Tchaikovsky, the great composer, was gay. You know, a lot of famous artists had homosexual desire and had no desire for a woman. I think, I would bet, you know, a lot of, you know, saints had homosexual desire, because you read the story about him and it's like, oh, from his youth, he preferred to play quiet games, and, you know, he didn't mix with the boys and stuff. But I almost see it as like, you know, they get born this way with a gentleness, with a softness, not because they're supposed to express sexual desire in a certain way, but because God has a different plan for them. He's making them not like other people, but the sexual part is not the important part. It's this other, like, superpower that he gave them. Anyway, that's a big decision. That's a big conversation for a different day. But
It's something I came to within like the past couple of years, because they keep saying, well, I was born this way, I was born this way. And I'm like, well, can God create someone that way? God created us into sin. We were born into sin, so that's their sin to bear.
Right.
But it's still a sin.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you can be born, I mean, you know, this would probably seem like a politically incorrect comparison, but you can be born like the guy in today's gospel without eyes. Doesn't mean God intends you to be without eyes. In the regeneration, the next life, you will be able to see. Because so even if you're born with something, that doesn't mean it was God's intention that you be that way forever, but it's something you have to bear. That being said, it also interestingly seems that it might be a curse that contains within it a strange blessing. That if men are liberated from desire for women, that actually might empower them to excel in these other ways. Anyway.
I don't know if you know it or not. I don't know. Does Islam, and I don't know about things like Buddhism and Hinduism, do they say that this is a normal human activity?
So my understanding is pretty much no religion except maybe Hinduism, which isn't really a religion, but it's like a collection of traditions. But like traditional Buddhism, traditional Islam, traditional Judaism, none of them approve homosexual practice. Because again, if you just look at, not to be crude, but if you just look at a man's body and a woman's body, like, it's obvious, like it works a certain way, like very clear. You know, you don't have to be you don't have to be a scientist to, like, kind of figure out what this is all about. And I think the attitudes we have towards homosexuality could really only develop when we're kind of so far removed from a state of nature, right? It could only develop in the modern world. It could only develop after birth control becomes widespread, because you know, we now perceive anyone before like the 1920s perceived sex as fundamentally connected with fertility. Now, you know, you can have, again, TV shows like Friends or Seinfeld, or, you know, maybe I'm dating myself a little bit, but, you know, that show just people screwing around all the time, and, you know, there's never any babies that come out of it. Before 100 years ago, no one thought that way. Before, everyone understood this to be an inherently fertile thing. So it's only because we're so far removed from nature, so far removed from the reality of fertility, that we can even conceive of a different, like, way of approaching it.
I know in the story of Freedom or Death, when one of the characters goes to see the Pasha has his pretty boys there, you know, but just like Christianity, it's not a legal situation, it's something off on the side.
Yeah, I mean, there's always, now, yeah, just to say it was always condemned doesn't mean it wasn't always there. It was always there. You can find about, and you can read, like, you know, in old monastic manuals in the Orthodox Church, you know, telling you, hey, you know, don't get any ideas with your brother monks or anything.
Yeah.
Why would they write that? Well, because it was happening from time to time, you know? I mean, this always existed as a reality. But yeah. Anyway, okay. Questions for reflection. Where did our Lord perform his first public miracle? Yep. How does the resurrection of Christ affect our understanding of the purpose of marriage? Ooh, gosh, did I tell you guys that? I don't even remember that.
Well, through sacrifice to the other, we are sort of resurrected as this.
That's great. That's great. Yes, exactly. Exactly. We're transformed. And how did the fathers understand the power of human eroticism? It was a reflection of the love inherent in God. Yeah,
To become one.
exactly. Why did Adam and Eve not realize they were naked before the fall? Oh, I didn't realize this.
Sin didn't. It was like not a thing.
Yeah. So, oh gosh, there's this whole other dimension of this story that I should have told you, but the fathers have always taught that sexuality as we experience it in this world is a fallen sexuality. The best way you can see that is how you can see it in the curse on women in Genesis 3, which is that women bear a huge cost for sexuality the way it is. They are weaker, they're more vulnerable. They could be, like physically forced. They can be abandoned by their husbands, and their body has to undergo a huge change in order to bear children. So, sexuality as we experience it is a beautiful thing, but it is fallen. If the fathers always taught that sexuality would be different if man did not fall. Not that there would be no sexuality, but somehow it would work differently. There wouldn't be the pain of childbirth. There wouldn't be the weakness and suffering and vulnerability of pregnant women. Things would be different. So Adam and Eve did not realize they were naked before the fall because they didn't fully have sexuality the way we have it now. It became that way after they fell. Yes.
I don't know. So I was told this, but I haven't read the church fathers well enough to know that the creation of Adam and Eve was an entirely different creation than the creation that proceeded after they sinned. After they sinned, there was an entirely new creation with sin, corruption,
Yeah.
and all that
Yeah.
that flowed out
So
of that.
so the fathers say yes. That's a very good point, and this is something that's not really. I don't really know Catholicism and Protestantism that well because I never was one, but I don't think it's as well understood or emphasized. But in the Orthodox Church, it's always been believed that Adam and Eve were more immaterial before the fall.
Yeah, I
They
never
did not
heard-
inhabit exactly the same physical reality we do now. So the world as we have it is a post-fallen world. Everything we experience in our flesh and blood bodies. That's why when it says God, right before he kicks them out of the Garden of Eden, it says he kills two animals and gives them coats of skin. The fathers have always read that, and actually ancient Jewish commentators said the same thing. This was them receiving corporeal bodies. This was them going from spirit. He gave them bodies of animals. Well, we have bodies of animals. We have similar bodies to monkeys and dogs and fish and whatever. Before the fall, we were more immaterial. And that's what happens when we die, right? And that's what happened to the resurrection of Jesus, right? He could walk through walls and stuff. He was more immaterial because he was perfected in the post-fallen. Yes.
I forgot where I saw it, but I think scientists, they were like studying light and trying to basically slow it down,
Mm-hmm.
like get it into a solid structure, and they kind of were able to sort of make like almost a material out of light.
That's interesting.
So it's like perhaps like we're just kind of more denser, slower, and have our light kind of just I don't know, dimmed, I guess.
There's really interesting stuff with light and with science, right? I think I could be wrong, but I think if you go through the mainstream Big Bang model, I think what was the first thing that began to exist was a whole bunch of photons, and then things cooled down and solidified. I don't really know if that's how things are proposed to work, and our models of the universe could be wrong too. But anyway, there's an interesting thing with light. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, all movement everything is judged against light. I mean, isn't that interesting? How biblical? Like, that sounds extremely biblical, right? If God is light, everything is judged against God. Wow, okay. Anyway, what is the first reason for marriage?
The joining of
Healthy outlet for sexual desire. What is the only reason Jesus allowed for divorce?
In case of adultery.
In case of adultery, yeah. Sorry, I know I didn't go through exactly all of these, but I'm grateful. Yeah, adultery.
In one place there is no allowance at all.
Yeah, in one of the Gospels, he doesn't seem to make an exception, but that's why we look at the whole picture, all of the Gospels. Whom does the husband image forth in marriage?
the way.
Who? Christ.
Okay.
And who does the wife image forth?
The husband.
The church.
The church.
Mm.
What is the responsibility of the wife in marriage?
Serve the husband.
To submit, not necessarily to serve, but to like he's a king and you wait on him, but to submit of yourself, to give yourself to him. What is the responsibility of the husband?
To submit.
To sacrifice himself. It's another way of saying to give all of himself.
So the
Yeah.
wife submits, the husband sacrifices.
Yes, exactly.
Submit and sacrifice mean the same thing.
They mean the same thing. They manifest themselves a little bit different in reality, right? Because a man is one thing, a woman is another thing, and the way they behave in real life is a little bit different. But it is ultimately the same reality, which is they're giving themselves. Wife no longer lives for herself, but her husband. The husband no longer lives for himself, but for his wife. And of course, always children. What role do children play in marriage? They're the natural consequence of it. If they just naturally come out of it. The purpose of marriage is not to have children, but they're a natural consequence of it. Okay. Lord, now let your servant depart in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you've prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation of the Gentiles and the glory for your people Israel. Amen. God bless you.